Here's a stack of King Arthur legends written hundreds of years ago across 4 different countries. I read all of them and retold them in a book. For over 1,000 years, people have created art inspired by King Arthur. Movies, plays, countless books and poems, video games and TV shows, like so much. That's a major reason just to learn about them. Okay, I didn't retell all of them, there's just too many, but I retold the most popular ones and ones that, to my knowledge, have not been retold in like 800 years. So that was pretty fun. Here's why I started doing this. In fall of 2020, I started teaching middle school English. For some reason, King Arthur just popped into my head, so I pulled out this book. This book was written by Roger Lancelin Green. It's a retelling of Arthurian legends, and it's one that I read as a child, and I thought it was just really awesome. So I started teaching it to my students, but as we read the stories, I realized something. It was written in kind of an older style that was a little difficult for my students, so I decided, why don't I just retell them in a more accessible way? I started buying a bunch of King Arthur books. As I bought them, I realized that there's like a lot. Look at all these. This is crazy. There's so many. I found a lot of stories that I didn't know about that were really, really cool. Like there's one about Lancelot conquering an enchanted castle all by himself. There's one about Arthur hunting a semi-divine boar, and that one's really cool. I didn't see these stories retold anywhere except for their original sources like hundreds of years ago. One of the questions that I got a lot was, how many of the stories are true? And I had to say, none of them. If he existed, then he lived in the 5th century AD. The first major source of legends about King Arthur was written 700 years later by this guy, Geoffrey of Monmouth. And he wrote a book called History of the Kings of Britain. He included a short section, probably 1 or 2 chapters maybe. One chapter about King Arthur. And it set out the summary of Arthur's life that we know today. He was crowned at a young age, he had a wife named Guinevere, he had a nephew named Gawain, he had another nephew that betrayed him and took the throne, and then he had a big battle with his nephew, and then Arthur was wounded and sent off to the Isle of Avalon for healing. And so Geoffrey established that arc of Arthur's life that still exists today. That story shot like fireworks across medieval culture. Everyone just loved it. And so they all started contributing stories to it. Arthur and his knights are kind of like the Avengers of the medieval period. A few hundred years after Geoffrey, the whole legendarium was condensed by Sir Thomas Malory in his book, Le Morte d'Arthur. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he was a French guy. This is like the golden standard of Arthurian legends. Anyone who's retelling Arthurian legends is basically just summarizing this book. I did not do that, however. Mostly what I was retelling was this stack of books over here. Hang on. This. The Lancelot Grail Cycle. It's a 10-volume collection of Arthurian legends. 2 of them are missing from this stack. Look at this. There's so many. So this was my major source of legends. A lot of people also asked me, oh, so you're like putting your own spin on it, you're putting your own take. And I had to say no, because parodies and retellings only work if people are familiar with the original material, and a lot of people that I talk to aren't familiar with the original material of Arthurian legends. My goal was to retell the legends in a faithful way, but also make them fresh. Let me just read to you the opening paragraph. Chapter 1, The Saxon Invasion. In a corner of the world, among the mists of northern seas, lies the island of Great Britain. For ages it bustled with people, stories, and a rich culture of its own. But all of this was swept away by the Saxon invasion, buried in war and fire. One name survived the desolation: Arthur. As ages passed, stories were told of his bravery, courtesy, and piety. Those stories became legends, and legends, as we know, only grow stronger with time. So though Britain lost the memory of its ancient days, the desolation forged some of the world's most enduring legends, those of King Arthur, his knights, and the mythical sword Excalibur. Anyway, I hope that I have inspired you to read the Arthurian legends. If you don't read my book, maybe you can read Sir Thomas Malory's or someone else's retelling or something like that. But these stories have been so influential and have existed so long that I really think that they're worth knowing and reading, and they're really enjoyable as well. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. Hit the button, hit the bell. Catch you later.